Hey everyone, today we're going to cover a very important topic and a very important trait for leaders. It's follow up and follow through. What does that mean? I wanted to start with a quote from John Maxwell, a famous, he's very famous for leadership. And his quote is, diligent follow up and follow through will set you apart from the crowd and communicate excellence. This is very, very true. Essentially, leaders that diligently are following up and follow through are, I would basically say, this is like the must have skill for leadership. Now, what are some of the examples, right? Just let's talk about the example. This will sort of drive the point home. So an example here could be like you promise to sort of find an answer to a question that was raised during the meeting, right? And the trait here of successful follow up would be make good on your promise, find the answer on or before the promise date. So that's one example, having that diligence. Another example is you could be working on a very complex project, lots of moving parts, lots of ambiguity. And instead of waiting for instructions or someone else to take an action, you proactively offer up, contribute to the success of the project. That's another example where being proactive when it comes to any situation is an important trait. In the context of meetings, think about this as whenever every time you do a meeting, never finish the meeting without clarifying what the follow through will be, who will do it, what resources they will use, how and when the next review will happen. So that's an example where at the end of every action, it could be a meeting, it could be a discussion, what are the next steps? What is the follow-up going to look like, right? And, a last aspect here, another very interesting example is, somebody, helps you out, does a favor. Oftentimes, we, typically will not really follow up, or it's important to at least drop them a note, a thank you note, some way. Again, this is another example, even like an aspect of courtesy, which is something that I personally like, and I personally think it says a lot about the leader. So now that you understand some examples of follow up and follow through, the key question is, what is your follow up reputation, right? And the key point here is when you honor your commitments, you are essentially creating credibility, leadership credibility. And in my mind, this makes or breaks, having that commitment or honoring the commitments that you have made, the word that you have expressed. I'll get this done. I will have this happen, so on and so forth. It's really about, can you stay true to it, make it happen? It shouldn't be the fact that the other person is having to constantly follow up or ask questions. Hey, is this on track? This is where you would have a pretty low reputation called the follow-up reputation, which is really a key when we think about leaders, leader growth, leader promotion, and so on. Now, what does in this context, right? What does good follow-up and follow-through look like, right? I would basically say there are three building blocks. One is promptly acknowledge a need or a request, right? Second is follow up regularly. So the very first step essentially is a basic acknowledgement that this is something that needs to be followed up. Following up regularly, and this is the key point here is um, even if the problem is not solved, if the task is actively going, constantly having a way to go back, giving an update where we are, what is the status. If you're not doing that, you're really having a risk of potentially losing the confidence of the people who depend. It's typically rated as an undependable person. And follow through on your promises. This is, I cannot emphasize enough, like without consistent follow through, your impact and credibility will be seriously undermined. Now, one important aspect here is that, sometimes, like obviously, it's not always possible to sort of make things happen as promised. And, there may be other things that may come, which may make it difficult, right? But the aspect of regularly following up and consistently communicating throughout the process till you find resolution is what sets leaders apart. It's an impression of responsiveness, dependability as a friend, colleague, and a leader. So, key takeaway here is, as you are sort of operating in meetings, working with your peers and so on, promptly acknowledge the request that you're, or a need that you're driving, follow up, follow through and make your promises happen. And during the process, regularly communicate, give updates proactively. It shouldn't be the case that the other person is needing to ask you. At that point, to be honest, your leadership is something which probably will not be well respected. So some people I have seen have natural follow up and follow through. It's like ingrained in their DNA. And for others who are learning this as a skill, here are a couple of points that you could follow. First off, be very careful in what you promise. If you're promising, make a note. In fact, anytime I'm in meetings, anytime there are any aspects where I have said, yes, I'll make it done, I have a notebook next to me. The very next moment, I'm writing it down. So anything that is coming as a promise, I track it. So be careful in what you're promising. Second, expect to change your mind. Initially during the discussion, you may have a lot of enthusiasm, but afterwards, this may become a drag, right, in terms of making things happen. So sort of making sure you're able to plow through during that phase. Don't confuse reasonable with realistic. Reasonable makes sense. Realistic is what's likely to happen, right? And this is, again, like as you're committing, right? Be realistic. Everything may sound reasonable, but being realistic is important. Write it down in your calendar. Number one thing. And one of the other things you could do, at least initially, is a buddy system where when I just trying to stick to commitments, amount of time it takes to change the behavior to become a habit, you can get a buddy to make you accountable, right? These are some tips that you can follow in terms of building in that follow up and follow through muscle. Now, there's another dimension as well, and which is really the takeaway of this, is within your team, there may be follow up and follow through issues, right? And one of a strategy here, basically, it's called the Hangout Checklist, right? So these are the questions. Let's say you're working with someone in your team who may have follow through issues based on past track record. You basically then start creating a handoff checklist, right? Which is questions you would ask the person who's handing off the work, and taking account of your delivery. So the questions here are, what do you understand about the priorities for this one? What concerns and ideas do you have that we not already covered? What are the key next steps? What do you need from me in order to be successful? Are there key contingencies? When should the next check-in be on the progress? And who else needs to know about this, or who else needs to be communicated? Essentially, what you're doing here is you're breaking it down for those individuals and ensuring that there is some kind of a structure that you're putting in place when it comes to follow up and follow through. Just to wrap up here, folks, again, this is another of favorite quotes of mine: follow up and follow through until the task is completed, the prize is won. I think getting to the end result requires persistence. My analogy here is anyone can start. It is the tenacity to end and close. So that's really the takeaway that I want you to reflect. Building the follow through muscle that really distinguishes you, as an absolute leader. And in fact, it's one of the most easiest rubric metric as a leader that it's surprisingly missing in many leaders. So assignment, and this is something for you, something was a reflection. What is the last time? When was the last time you had dropped the ball? What was the reason, and how did you handle it? This is basically sort of helping you think about how to further enhance, the capacity to practice, plan, make sure if you're making commitments, you are making those commitments come true. I hope you follow up and follow through on this session as well as the assignment. Thanks, everyone.